And
it looks like you're starting. So in about a minute or so, I'll log off, Tom.
okay, I don't. Okay, it is recording. It looks like it's recording now.
Yeah.
Okay, so I will share the. I've got a couple of things up if you'd like.
Hang on one second. We have to call the meeting to order. Sorry.
Okay.
Just for legality. So I'd like to call the meeting to order at 6:03 p.m. And thank you everybody for being here. And I would like to suggest to the committee that we table the approval of the minutes till our next meeting, if that's okay. All those in favor of tabling the March 10th minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, that's, I think, unanimous.
Aye, yes, sorry, I was on mute.
Those are tabled. Okay, moving on, Tom, to item agenda number 3, review and make recommendations relative to the superintendent's proposed fiscal year 2020-21 budget recommendation, reconciliation recommendations.
Okay, so I put up the agenda just so everyone can see the agenda. I'll stop sharing that for the time being, just so I think it's a little easier to see each other without sharing. But I have a bunch of the documents. I've got the superintendent's original budget presentation from March 17th, and I'd be happy to walk through that again if you want, although that would take a number of minutes to do that, or we could jump directly to the summary budget goals and the specific cut list, which I just put up on the list here, or on the screen here. So I guess, the issue is whether you want me to go through the superintendent's presentation again, just to refresh your memory as to what the superintendent's recommendations were, or whether you'd like to have just a one-page summary of the slides up or the cuts up to talk about the cuts.
So I don't believe that I need a review of the superintendent's report. Does anyone else on the committee feel that they would benefit from that?
I don't necessarily need it, but I'm just wondering if the public, if that might be helpful for the public.
Yes.
Okay.
This goes on.
So I do want to preface it with making sure that the public understands that these are the superintendent's recommendations. This has not been voted on by the board or the finance committee of the board.
Sure.
Go ahead, Tom.
Sure. So just to walk through quickly the presentation, the superintendent had made a number of recommendations in order to reduce the budget in line with the funding recommendation coming from the city finance director, and had developed a plan to do that. That plan relied on making a number of changes in a variety of areas. First, just walking through the first slide here, in the preschool area, moving 20 school readiness slots from Jefferson to the Brookside Primary Montessori program, generating savings of about $102,000 in local expenditures. In the elementary area, the superintendent had recommended reducing funding in the Alliance District grant for CSID positions from 10 FTEs to 6 FTEs, and to allocate a 0.6 CISD for each elementary school in the Alliance grant, and then allow the elementary schools to either reduce their reliance on CISDs or to fund the remaining 0.4 for that position if they felt that that was an important priority and wanted to fund that within their school-based budget.
Can I ask a question about that?
Sure.
Have you, first of all, can the board please have an emailed list of exactly how that would fall out school by school? And second of all, have you had feedback? I know that the SGCs have probably been unable to meet, but have you received any feedback from the SGC about their willingness or ability to do this from their SBB?
Well, the SBB process is, or the school budget process is really just getting underway. The elementary schools are have their budget packages and are working on them. We have not opened any meetings with them yet. We're going to be having meetings with them starting in a couple of weeks, and those meetings will be continuing through the latter half of April and then into May. At this point, we can't give you a school by school itemization of how each school is going to deal with that, because the schools are really just starting to work on that. But we
Okay.
should know more certainly in
By the May Finance Committee?
Yeah, May. I don't know that it will be all wrapped up by May Finance. We had indicated to the principals we're trying to get this budget process wrapped up by the third week in May, we're hoping. But understanding the environment we're in with all the changes that have been necessitated by this shutdown of the schools and the move to distance learning, obviously it's it's been difficult to get everyone focused on budgets when they're trying to figure out how to deliver education to our students first and foremost.
Agreed. And what's for the public again, when the superintendent presented this, he did discuss over the last couple of board meetings that alliance funding is intended to be used for new innovative ways to improve education in our buildings. And he felt that we had the CISDs on the Alliance grant for long enough that it no longer qualified as a new and innovative use, and we should be moving that to our SBB. So I think we have to watch this closely and see how the school buildings respond. And okay, so let's go ahead. Thank you for answering the questions there.
Sure, and I believe we do have Sandra on the phone, so actually I think it's good to, if we are going to talk about grants and so on, it's good to do that while Sandra is able to join us and not require her to be on the entire meeting if possible. So moving on in terms of other reductions at the elementary level, I probably should have prefaced my remarks, as the superintendent did as well, that none of these reductions are reductions that we are happy to be making. None of these are reductions that we want to make. Understand that we're trying to reconcile the budget back to the amount that the city is, we're anticipating the city is going to approve for the Board of Education. And so these are, painful cuts. These are cuts that we would prefer not to make, but they're cuts that, we believe have the least impact on direct instructional service and direct student outcomes. So that's why it's, these recommendations are as we've presented them. So the second elementary recommendation is for those schools that have more than 2 general education paras to reduce by 1 para at those schools. That would total 6 para positions for a savings of $174,000. It's important to note that the reading interventionists that are funded by Title I federal grants and and funded by the Priority School District grant are exempt. Special education paras are exempt. ELL paras are exempt. We're only talking about the non-exempt general education paras in this case. So moving on, at the middle schools, the superintendent's recommendation was to reduce 3 of the 12 counselor positions for a savings of $347,000. As the superintendent noted, Norwalk has the lowest ratio of students to counselors in the middle grades of any school district in Connecticut. The Counseling Redesign Committee took advantage of this overcapacity by recommending that counseling services be brought into grade 5 based on the feeder patterns for the elementary and middle schools. The implication of this recommendation of reducing the 3 counselors would be that new counseling services at the 5th grade would have to be deferred to a subsequent year. But we do think, again, given the fact that Norwalk's ratio of counselors at the middle school level is particularly strong or high, we feel that that's an area that a reduction can be sustained in.
I think, does any member of the committee want to speak to this?
As far as the counselors?
Yep.
So I just wonder if, I mean, I know, I get it. We have, we have to do what we have to do to get the budget to be in line with what the city will pay. But, somebody's going to have to do the work. So I guess we would just have to figure that out. Like, if we reduce the counselors, which the teachers heavily rely on, what
Right.
impact are we going to have? So.
And I think, can you guys hear me or am I done again?
No, we can hear
Nope.
you.
Okay. So I think that generally this has been an area where the board has wanted to reconsider because we feel that these positions are already strained and at capacity. And so I think there's been discussion of perhaps postponing the director of counseling position and utilizing other resources within the district in order to be able to save this money for this purpose, because we made a big deal about going to a house structure with the middle school redesign, and the counselors are actually really pivotal to that house structure at the middle school level. They are the central figure for their house and coordinator and know the kids in their house. And this proposal would change that structure markedly. So in addition to having them overburdened with their caseload, it would also be a challenge logistically to manage those house issues.
Yeah,
So,
Barbara, can I say something?
sure.
I also think that we're going to have to lean on them more this year than ever before because of what we're going through, especially if and when we come back to school, back into the building. The students are going to need a lot of help emotionally, socially, education, and counselors are going to be the ones that are going to work overtime during this time of trying to get everybody settled in, helping, figuring out where the children stand, and things like that. So
I totally agree. Placement and reintegration and recreating school climate. And I think we could be dealing with situations with domestic violence and serious
a lot of
unemployment.
Depression.
Yeah.
Depression due to the fact, like, a lot of these kids have lost either grandparents. So there's a lot. I was on the phone with a teacher who's dealing with a student who has lost 2 grandparents due to the coronavirus. So, we may not see it, but it's, there's a lot of depression.
Yeah. So I think, Tom, what we're trying to say, I don't think we intend to vote on anything this evening, but I think we're trying to say that this is not an area that the board would be interested in cutting. I do note that we did have an extra counselor at Roden, so that might be a position that we could consider, but otherwise it's not an area in which we're eager to make a cut.
Yeah, the only thing I want to add to that is, and maybe either Kristen or Sandra can jump in here, but my recollection is that the director of school counseling position is one that is
on the priority
funded from grants, and generally the way these grants work is you can't supplant locally funded expenses. So to the extent we would be thinking that you wanted to try to fund these three counselors from savings on not going forward with the director of school council.
I understand.
The problem, we can't necessarily move those counselor positions over to those grants.
Right, so we have to
Mm,
study and see, we have to play a bit of a game of Tetris to see what else in the budget might be able to be put on the grant such that we could find a way to save the council.
That's correct. And just as a rule of thumb, as we're thinking about this game of Tetris, is that it tends to be new initiatives and not necessarily something that has been ongoing.
Got it.
And the director of counseling currently is in the PSD grant as a 0.5,
Yes.
and the other piece is 0.5 local.
Right.
I thought it was 0.5
IDEA.
IDA.
So IDEA and 0.5 PSD.
Correct.
And we could, we could explore, I don't know, we have to keep talking about it and see,
Right.
but that's an area in which the board would like to continue to explore options. Okay,
Okay,
so why don't we keep
good.
moving?
Yep. Okay. So also at the middle school, you'll recall that the superintendent had recommended discontinuing the summer school or summer reading academy for the rising sixth graders at a savings of $220,000. This was after the board previously decided to delete or eliminate funding for the rising seventh graders. The thinking here is that it's not cost effective or particularly feasible to operate a school-based summer school for one grade only, and therefore it made some sense to eliminate the sixth grade summer school. Now, with that said, we are this recommendation was put together before the shutdown and
Right.
the move to distance learning, and so I know the superintendent does have concerns about the need to potentially expand summer learning to help potentially offset some learning loss that could be occurring during this unanticipated shutdown. So the only other thing I'll say about that, though, is and I'll be talking about this more later on the agenda, there is some prospect, certainly not a known, we can't say with certainty that it's going to happen, but we do know that the Federal CARES Act has allocated funding for school districts, and don't have any guidance yet on how the State Department of Education is going to allow those funds to be used, but there may be some funding available to do some,
I'm
provide.
going to listen in to the conversation with Jim Himes about federal funding tomorrow and send a question in and see if I can get an answer. So we'll see.
Do we have an idea of when, do we have a ballpark of when we might know if, that funding will be available?
I wish we did. I do not.
I don't know.
Trying to get information on the Federal CARES Act. All I know is that the indication was that Connecticut in total was supposed to get about $111 million in one bucket and another roughly $30 million in another bucket, and both of those were for educational purposes. But I
Did you say the second bucket was 130 or 30?
30. Yeah, I had seen about 111 million and then a $30 million bucket in emergency aid that was for education. That again, we've received no guidance at this point from the state government as to how those funds. We haven't received any confirmation of those amounts. We have heard that the federal law is going to somehow tie the distribution of these funds to Title I formula, and maybe Sandra, has some contacts at the state that are providing her information, but at this point, I don't have any details on it, unfortunately.
So, Barbara,
Doesn't
I
look
think
like
that's
Sandra has
something
anything yet. You're muted.
that we really
Sandra.
need
Oh,
to
no,
think
nothing
about.
yet.
Okay, so nothing yet, but you know, because we are a Title I recipient, I would expect us to get something.
Okay.
But
Right.
exactly how much,
Barbara, may I
I
speak?
don't know.
We really need to think about that, because even though I think the teachers are doing a phenomenal job, and even some of the students who've had issues with learning, they're getting, honestly, they're getting a lot of supports now, even though they're getting it in distance learning. However, due to our conversation yesterday with the curriculum committee, we really need to think about supporting students in all grades in case there has been some kind of, fallback from learning. So I don't know how you felt about the conversation yesterday, but I think because of the pandemic, we really need to consider, where kids are and where the gaps are, not just in the middle grades, but with all the grades.
Yes, and I think that Brenda intended to bring us some sort of a proposal
She didn't bring
regarding.
a proposal, but the basic thing that we got yesterday is phase 8 and phase 9. We need to really be looking at the summer school, and we really need to look at what we're going to do in the fall in the event. So some of her questions, as far as the budget, what's going to be our purpose, for the summer academy and the summer school, who's going to attend, who's going to be required, and how will we fund all of the grades just in case some of the kids, need those extra supports. So
Okay.
I think that's something we need to think about too.
Okay, I can write Jim and see if he has an idea if we could maybe use some of this funding for summer school.
That would be really good.
Okay. All right.
And
Go
if there's
ahead, Tom.
anything I can do too, I don't want to put this all on you. If there's
Oh, no,
anything
we'll
that
do it
I
together.
can do,
We'll do it together.
Okay.
All right. What's
Okay.
next?
So I'll move on. So also in the middle schools, the superintendent had recommended reducing the dean of students positions at each middle school from a 1.0 FTE to a 0.4 FTE, with the notion that it would be a teacher who would be teaching a 0.6 and then serving in a dean of students role at 0.4. That would save 2.4 FTEs for a savings of $276,000. We've noted that the full-time dean of students are relatively new positions to the district. They are positions that the middle schools, did want to create over the last few years, but again, because they're new and we think there's an opportunity to potentially combine this with somebody who's teaching part of the time and fulfilling the dean of students role part of the time, we think that this is a way to go that would save some money and not have too great an impact on student learning and student achievement. Again, I think it's important to note none of these recommendations are ones that we'd be making if the budget was going to be fully funded, but since we don't anticipate the budget's going to be fully funded, to the extent that the board is doesn't want to support one or more of these recommendations, it means you have to find something else to substitute for it. So in any event, that's the recommendation on this.
Can I ask, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Are those positions NFT rather than NASA?
Yes.
Yes, they would be.
Okay, so it's
NFT.
easy to split that way. Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay,
Got it.
move on. Okay, at the high school level, the largest, the most significant recommendation is to eliminate the 24 department head stipends. And the real savings here is not in the stipend savings, because the stipends amount to about $78,000. The significant savings is the elimination of the release time. The release time for each department head currently is released 0.4 FTE or 2 classes, and that across the entire district then equates to 9.6 FTEs. And the savings associated with 9.6 FTEs is $1.1 million. So that's a very, significant part of this recommendation.
I think this is an area in which the board would like to explore collaboration with the NFT through negotiation to find an agreement that would allow us to split the difference here. But that negotiation has not commenced, as I understand it.
Okay, I've not been involved in any negotiations on this, but that would normally be handled by Javier Padilla in the talent office. So, I would recommend certainly following up with the superintendent and possibly Javier Padilla on, on that. I think the issue, as I understand it, is based on the current NFT contract. If we have appointed somebody as a department head, then they are entitled to the release time of the 2 classes. And, so if there were to be some negotiation with NFT, then, there might be an opportunity to, look at something that didn't require the, release time of 0.4. In order to generate the full savings, though, you would need to do away with the release time entirely. So if you split let's say you went from a release time of 2 classes down to a release time of 1 class, then your savings would be cut in half as well, obviously. So
We understand. Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay, also at the high school, the superintendent's recommendation, and he has indicated that it's his recommendation that this should be done regardless, whether you're looking for budget savings or not. But his recommendation is to reduce the 9th grade course load from 8 classes to 7 classes with 1 period of instructional support. This would allow us to reduce 3.2 FTEs for a savings of $368,000, but more importantly, it would help incoming ninth graders who may be at times overwhelmed with the course load and the work associated with that course load. And we know, of course, that when students reach the 11th and 12th grade, that if they've taken this higher course load at the 9th and 10th grade, they then have, they have, something quite a bit less than a full schedule by the time they hit 11th and 12th grade. So this will really balance out the impact on our students, and we think that'll improve social and emotional well-being of particularly the 9th graders.
Sandra, can I ask you a question about this? It's very clear in black and white here that the superintendent is suggesting this for 9th graders, that it could be applied to grade 10. There's sort of a rumor floating around in the community that after making a big deal about 26 credits, we're now cutting access to credits. Can you explain how this plays out over a 4-year career for the public?
I mean, I think that there are districts that have a capstone that is also a credit versus that there are some districts that don't. We do have that additional credit through that capstone. What this suggests is that we take a closer look at what the impact is on our younger kids as they're transitioning from middle school to 9th grade. And I think that having this year with us learning from this year about what that impact is for not just the younger kids who are transitioning from middle school, but also for the kids that are in their 11th and 12th grade, as far as how is it that we are making sure that the resources are being sort of divided over the 4 years, is that this is a change that has minimal impact on instruction, right? A loss of instruction because it would be an incoming class, but that it has benefits that would benefit all 4 years. I don't know if that
I have
answers your question. Mhm.
I have two follow-ups. The first is this an across-the-board change, or if there is a
Yeah.
high-performing academic student, could they take 8 classes, or are they shut out from taking 8 classes? And does that affect their GPA when they go to apply for college?
So unfortunately, I can't answer those. That's above my pay grade. That would be a Brenda Myers question,
Right.
and with the curriculum team. So this is really largely impacts curriculum. And then you start to get into policy when you start to get into GPA and we start to get into the weight of the courses. But I know that the spirit behind what Dr. A was recommending is that it would be better socially and emotionally for those younger kids, but actually we would reap the benefits with the older kids because we would have a more robust schedule for them.
Sherelle, is that something we could add to our discussions with Brenda, with the curriculum committee?
Yeah, I'm actually emailing her right now to ask her
You're
to
so
just
good.
explain how this would play out.
Do you remember,
Thanks.
Kristen, whether or not I have some vague recollection of a discussion with Brenda Myers about that, but I don't recall the answer. I for some reason, I think that it is that students would be allowed to take the additional class if they wanted, but so I thought that this was based on, an expectation of the number of students that would elect to take the lower number of classes. But can you confirm that, Kristen? Do you know?
I don't know off the top of my head, to be honest with you. I was just looking through my notes to see if we had some commentary on that. But it was to relieve the stress of the transition into 9th grade.
Yeah.
So some of the
yeah, I think the best way to proceed is just to ask Brenda Myers, and I'm sure Dr. Myers would know the answer.
Great. Thank you so much. Don't want to get too far in the weeds, but we also
Wait,
want to
can I
know.
ask
Yeah.
you? On the flip side, how about a child that is behind, fails a class, fails a couple, but needs the extra class to be able to make those credits to graduate? What's the flexibility on that if we continue the 7 classes through the other grades?
Oh, it wouldn't continue.
It would just be the 9th, because
Yeah.
the way because it says this course scheduling change can also be applied to 10th grade.
I'm guessing that might be for last year's students who took 8 and could take 7 this year.
Okay, so it would only be 9th. That would be my
Right.
concern, but that would be it. Okay.
But Sherelle, let's nail this down with Brenda Myers and really understand.
Yep, I'm doing
what's
that right
behind
now.
this. Perfect.
Thank you.
Okay, yep, I'm emailing her and I've copied you and I've also added Dr. Adamowski so that they can explain it and maybe give us some options.
Great. Thank you so much.
Sure.
All right, Tom, let's move on.
Okay, moving on. The next one is a little smaller, but it's to reduce the number of high school class advisors from 16 to 8. When assistant principals were assigned to each class, we should have reduced the number of class advisors. Instead of having 2 class advisors, we really only need 1 class advisor. So by having 1 class advisor per grade at each of the high schools, it reduces the total number of class advisors in half and saves $20,000 in the class advisor stipend category.
And just to clarify, the idea is that those assistant principals are meant to be a partner to the class advisor that remains. So it wouldn't be that one person generating everything by themselves for their class.
Correct. That's right.
That's been expressed as a fear from the community. So thank you for clarifying.
Okay. So then in the district central office, the superintendent has recommended reducing 1 senior management or chief position and the corresponding secretary for a savings of $300,000. He has not identified the specific position that would be eliminated and has recommended that there be consultation with the new superintendent prior to selecting which position would be eliminated under this recommendation.
It's an incredibly painful decision because our entire team is highly valued.
Yeah, I mean, as the superintendent has said here, it does mean a diminished capacity of the district office leadership, certainly, because you just can't get as much done when if we're missing one of the major team members of the team. Absolutely. So, okay, I'll move on. Also in the central office, the superintendent has recommended eliminating one position from the talent office, an HR business partner, for a savings of $117,000. The superintendent has noted that a couple of years ago, when there was a particular need in special education, and there were just there's a whole-scale reorganization going on, which meant there was just a lot of HR business that the talent office or that the special education office required, and that some of that has settled down a bit, and they are in a more stable place at this point, and a place of with more robust staffing in place. And so the superintendent has recommended that he believes we can eliminate one position there. It will mean that existing staff has to reallocate duties, certainly, to continue to provide coverage.
So I will note, I'm not resisting this particular cut, but I will note that even this year, there's been a high volume of SPED positions that have either resigned or had to be moved. So there's been a lot of activity in that area this year, even though we've somewhat stabilized. Stable doesn't seem very stable yet to me, based on what we're voting on every month.
Right, understood. That none of these
Yeah.
none of these cuts are cuts that we are would be making in the absence of of a need to make significant reductions
Right.
to the district budget.
Yep. Okay.
Okay, continuing on, central office, the budget, the superintendent's recommendation is to reduce 3 of the 4 teacher in residence positions that are currently funded in the priority school district grant for a savings of $337,000. Current positions are assigned to reading, math and science, world language, and special education. The implication of this is that the purpose of the teacher in residence program would move from a leadership development program where we're looking to identify and develop in-house future leaders for the school district, to one of really just providing direct assistance to schools. So the one remaining position would be in the curriculum area and would be rotated depending on which area of the curriculum was under revision in that upcoming year.
Sherelle, do you have anything to comment on this since it's your department?
No, I think I would like to talk to Brenda a little bit more, just to get an idea, since she's on the front lines. I'd like to speak to her.
I think that would be good. While this makes financial sense, I do want for the public to review that prior to the recession that started in 2008, Norwalk Public Schools had 11 people in the curriculum department. And with this reduction, we would go down to 5. We had been at 3 and then 5, and now we were 6, and then we'll be going back down to 5. And that really affects our ability to innovate and deliver support for our teaching staff to adhere to the curriculum that the board has approved.
Yep, understood. So Okay. Then we talk about budget reductions that are related to a number of our budget goals. And we first start out with a reduction to employee benefit cost. This one is, probably the least impactful of the changes because this is really simply incorporating the most current benefit cost estimates that are coming from the state controller's office for continuing with the state partnership 2.0 health plan. So there is savings because at the point that our budget was first developed in November, the consultant was indicating our costs were going to go up at something like, I think the number was 12.4% or something like that. And the revised estimate is now about a 6.5% increase. So there is significant savings in health insurance, and we've incorporated that now in this recommendation.
Tom, can I ask you, is that locked in for next year? I know that I had sent you the New York Times article regarding the possibility that the cost of COVID could increase healthcare costs. Do you know if what we have now at 6% is locked in?
No, it is not locked in. The state normally locks in the numbers on April 1st. I have not seen those yet. Haven't gotten any formal word that they've locked them in, but because of the pandemic, it's quite possible that they may be, delayed in getting that locked in as well. But or they may, defer and say they're not going to lock it in. But normally they would lock in the rates on April 1st. I can certainly between now and the board meeting next week, I can double check to see if they have locked them in, but I have not heard, and I normally would have gotten something from our health insurance consultant when they do lock them in.
If you could just send something to the board when you have it locked so that we're aware of what our real savings may be, that would be great.
Okay.
And I'm heartened by the fact that the federal level has said that they will pay for COVID testing and care, but we have to see how that actually plays out on the ground and how that affects the rates. So,
Right.
Okay, moving on.
Okay, goal 3 was related to the expansion of the ELL program. So the budget recommendation adds $1 million to replace the 1920 special appropriation that you all are aware of, but then it makes a number of other adjustments, reduces an ELL co-teacher, and it moves a number of what had been anticipated to be program enhancements that were going to be locally funded and moves them to the Alliance grant and in some cases to the IDEA grant. We have an itemization of that on the budget cuts if you want to see that.
Yeah, let's do that. I think we have it, but for the public.
So let's see. I think.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, let me reduce the size here a little bit because it's that looks a little too small. Try that. I think we can see that. So budget goal, it's in this area here, budget goal 3 that we are talking about. Kristen, can you walk through these? Can you see them okay or not?
I have it on my screen as well. So you could see each line item for budget goal 3. It shows you if it's a cut or if it's had been moved to Alliance, PSD, IDA, etc. So the first piece is budget goal 3, EL translation interpretation services have moved to the PSD grant for $26,500. The new staff co-teacher was cut. The EL TESOL certification was moved to the Alliance grant, and that was $100,000. The new EL elementary teacher salary and benefits, there was actually 2 FTEs there. That was $230,000 moved to PSD. the new bilingual support for special ed. The 250,000, as you remember, consisted of 3 roles or 2.5 roles: the psychologist, the speech pathologist, and the special education teacher, all moved to the IDEA grant worth 250,000.
So that's
And-
those 3 items on this sheet, right? Yeah.
Correct. Yep. So the 108, the 103, and the 38 is your 250,000 that everyone's probably familiar with.
Mhm.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
I'm sorry to everyone. My computer hardware for some reason turns my sound off on its own. Can you remind me what the guidelines are for priority school, or could you send it to the committee after the meeting? What qualifies for priority school grant?
For priority or for alliance?
I think the superintendent already shared the alliance text with us in February, but you could probably include both in the email, and that would help us very much in our thinking.
Sure. Would it be, do you want a little overview now, or do you want me to just send it to you?
For the public, why don't you just briefly talk about priority?
Yeah, so for the priority, the number one reason why we get it, or the number one reason why we should be using it, is for the creation or expansion of programs. And this is right on the Connecticut Department of Ed website. So people can also just look it up if you just Google priority school grants also. Alternative or transitional programs for students having difficulty succeeding in traditional education, so alternative education, academic enrichment, development or expansion of extended day for kindergarten programs, development of extended early reading intervention programs, enhancement and use of technology, initiatives to strengthen parent involvement, and then purposes of obtaining accreditation. So those are primarily the uses for priority schools.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, Kristen, you want to, I think there were a couple more items here that looked like they moved to the Alliance grant, right?
Do you want me to go through the remainder of the district list then? Or just pieces that move to the grants? So as we said, the director of counseling for 200,000, 50% of that, or a 0.5 FTE, was moved to the PSD grant, and 0.5 was moved to the IDEA grant. Budget goal 8, the resources as well as the ASL teacher salary and benefits were both moved to PSD. 50,000 for the resources and 115 average salary and benefits for the teacher salary and benefits. And budget goal 9, the 7th grade, the rising 7th graders for 245. I believe you already spoke about that.
Right.
The cut went there. And I don't know if you want me to go anywhere else, Tom, or just.
I think that covered it. So why don't I go back to the presentation here. And I think that covered everything on this slide. If we go on to goal 4, we've already talked about the preschool funding of the primary Montessori grades through the school readiness grant. And that would be moving Jefferson school readiness slots over to Brookside, which needs to happen anyway because of the fact that Jefferson's going to be closed for next year. The Jefferson building will be closed for next year, and there's not room for the preschool students at the Ponus campus when Jefferson is temporarily located at Ponus. I think we talked about goal. No, we didn't talk about goal 5. Yes.
Tom, I just want to push back on behalf of the board regarding the Kendall funding. There's something in this that really rubs me the wrong way, because Silvermine was rolled out 1 grade at a time. So as much as we support Kendall in their magnet status, I think the board made it pretty clear that we could only envision a 3-year rollout given the budget constraints. And frankly, that was when we didn't know we might have further constraints from a pandemic.
The standard we were using for Kendall and the rollout of the magnet funding for Kendall was based on the standard that we use for Tracy. The Tracy Character Ed School, we did that over a 2-year period,
Correct.
K to 3, and then 4 and 5 in the second year. So the standard we were using here for Kendall was the same that we used for the last magnet school. The issue with Silvermine and the way it was done at Silvermine is because of the fact that Silvermine previously was a half dual language school, half neighborhood school, and we were only advancing it to 100% magnet school, 1 grade at a time. And so that's why we were advancing the magnet funding for Silvermine more slowly, was because of the fact that the expansion of the magnet program at Silvermine was being undertaken more slowly, because obviously we didn't want to be in a position where if somebody was not in the dual language track but was, say, in 3rd grade and they were happy with being there, we didn't want to be in a position to say you're going to have to move to another school. So that was really, I think, our separate circumstances.
I think what's difficult for the board in this circumstance is that we have, Kendall is actually, in terms of absolute scores, at the middle of the pack. It is not the lowest performing school anymore. And to cut CISDs and paras for other schools and then reach for a significant amount of extra funding in this school, it's difficult for the community. So by increasing it gradually over a slower period of time, we're not taking money from another school to give money to this school. And that's what's difficult for the board.
Okay, well, I mean, certainly, understand, your position, and, I guess it sounds like you're not actually making recommendations tonight anyway. Is that right? You're going to?
That's correct. We're collecting information and looking for the follow-up points and working to see what money would be coming from the federal government in any kind of a, bailout situation. Or so I think the board does not have enough information yet. I mean, even the
Barbara, I
healthcare.
do have a question.
Yep.
So, and it's just for point of information, is Kendall technically a magnet school, or does that even matter? Has it achieved magnet status?
Barbara, you're muted, it sounds. We can't hear you.
Terrell, are you there?
I'm here.
My computer did that
I was
thing.
just wondering, just out of curiosity, if Kendall has achieved magnet status, and does that matter?
So my understanding is that magnet status was voted on in August. And then, so they have achieved magnet status, but the question is the funding for the rate at which that magnet status is realized.
No, I understand that, but I was just wondering about the magnet status. Okay. Onward.
Okay, so I'll go back to our presentation, which wrong one. The goal 5 was related to the student transportation contract, and there are some savings that are built into the transportation as a result of the rebidding of the contract for transportation, and so those savings are built into the budget as well. Goal 6 is
Tom, before you go ahead, I know that for the public, they wanted to know what the savings was on the bus contracts.
Oh, sure.
335,000.
Yeah, it should be on this sheet here if I can find it. 353,000.
Oh, whoops, I flipped the
350.
numbers. That's even better.
Yep, 353,000. Okay.
And that's in savings, correct?
That essentially means that the cost of the Healthy Start Times comes down to about 104,000.
Right. We talked about counseling already, and I think we talked about the director of counseling position, consolidated in special education, funded 0.5 from IDA and 0.5 from the PSD grant, and the annual maintenance cost for Ruler and Rethink is moved to student-based budget funding.
Is there a possibility that we could write a grant for the Rethink and Ruler?
I mean, I guess there's always possibility. I'd have to talk to Sandra and see if she thinks there's any grants that would be potentially available for something like that, or perhaps Ralph would know of some foundation funding that that might be available.
I know that we have a couple of foundations in our area that are prioritizing ESEL, and maybe they would be interested to know that it's a challenge for us right now.
We can follow up with Ralph. Kristen, maybe you can send Ralph an email on that.
Sure, no problem.
Okay.
Thank you.
And
I will work with Ralph also, okay, Tom and Kristen?
Okay, terrific. Thank you,
Thanks.
Sandra. So the last two goals are Goal 8, the introduction of American Sign Language. Since that is a new program, it would be grant eligible. And so at this point, the recommendation is to move that expense into the PSD grant. And then the last item, Goal 9, was already defunded, which was the expansion of summer school to grade 7.
We may now need to reconsider. Okay. Thank you for reviewing that. We thought we knew it all, but I guess we had questions, so thanks.
Okay, so I'm back to our regular screen here. So I'm not sure. We obviously, the board had, the committee had quite a bit of discussion. I don't know if you have any further discussion or further questions that you want to, bring up now.
Anybody?
Nope.
I think the committee was interested to know if we could reconsider the IT interns. Can you hear me?
Yeah, the IT intern. I'm trying to remember what was the issue on the IT intern.
Well, they're in line item 126 for 76,000. I'm just wondering if we could make a cut there for some savings.
We could talk to Ralph further about that, or have an email about that if he wants further commentary to explain what they're doing.
Okay. And then just wondering if there's any savings to be had in the testing department, because we won't be doing testing this year. Are we saving on test booklets or grading or salary for administration?
There may be savings this year. I don't, think we would assume any savings for next year in that area, but for this year, that's one of the items that I think is worth certainly, following
Can you hear
up.
me?
Yes.
If there are no test results, do we still need positions to analyze the test results?
We can maybe follow up with Diane Filardo and just ask the question.
Yeah.
If any of the savings or things happening this year impact next year.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, I would think the staffing would certainly be needed because it's, it's still an ongoing function and requirement of the district to undertake this testing, and certainly it's a important way in which the district and the board and the senior leadership for the district evaluates the performance of our students and the performance of the school district. And so the testing office really is a very vital function. You know, I would probably defer to Dr. Myers, but I know that she would, you know, passionately defend those positions. I'm quite certain, and I'm sure she'd do it more eloquently than I can. But you know,
I understand, and I agree. But I think we have to ask the question of what savings could be realized there. We obviously are going to have an evaluation crunch when students come back in, because we're going to need to see where they are and what learning loss there's been. In the original budget, there was some magnet funding that was rolling out new in a couple of the buildings, particularly Tracy. And I was wondering if you could break down how Tracy plans to spend their new allocation of magnet funding the way you have for Kendall, just so that the board has that awareness of what's done.
I can follow up with Teresa Rangel. We haven't had the SBB meetings yet, so it's a little premature, but maybe she could put it at the same level we did for Kendall. And did everyone get the revised Kendall? We had a new assumption that came up today, so.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Board received an email from their SGC, you know, wanting to defend that funding and saying that they had a clear plan, and we're just curious to know what the plan is.
Okay.
Okay.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yep.
Was there a big expense or an expense that we didn't foresee with this distant learning that we have to think about?
That's actually further on the agenda.
right. That is actually one of the other agenda items that we're still compiling numbers, and we don't. Well, we're really in the early stages of compiling numbers. We're compiling areas that we are trying to get our arms around, but we have areas where we are spending more money because of the pandemic and the shutdown of schools and the move to distance learning. And we have areas where we're spending more money, and we have areas where we're spending less money. And you know, we'll see where that all lands. We can't project at this point whether we're even positive or negative. You know, we do know that there are definitely some large unanticipated expenses, and there are some areas where we're going to turn back or we're going to underspend the budget because of the shutdown. So.
And you're going to present that to us in May.
That's our hope. I mean, it's a bit of a moving target, because part of it depends on, you know, for instance, we are spending a pretty sizable amount of money on sanitizing our school buildings in anticipation. Originally, when we closed down, we thought we were going to be going back into the schools on April 20th, and wanted to be able to assure our parents and students and staff that the buildings had been professionally sanitized and were safe to go into. And we still, obviously, when we do go back into the buildings, we want to be able to assure people of that. So that was an unanticipated expense. We're hoping that that expense will be something that is reimbursed. Actually, under the president has accepted the governor's request to declare Connecticut a disaster area. And so that is akin to really what we're used to having in government with emergency, you know, hurricanes and other natural disasters where FEMA will come in and then help pay some of usually come in and pay 75% of your cleanup cost and so on. There was some guidance that I did see put out by FEMA after the declaration of a disaster was approved, that buildings sanitizing costs were going to be considered an eligible expense. So we're hoping that there'll be a 75% reimbursement. Of course, we don't know when that might occur, when that reimbursement is likely going to be long after June 30th, long after the fiscal year is closed, because, again, there's nothing comparable to this, and even in, a more localized storm, the process can be quite time consuming when you've got potentially disasters all over the country. I can't imagine, how long that process might take, but we'll have to see. But in any event, so that's some of the uncertainty we face is, how much money are we going to spend on the cleaning, and then is it going to be, reimbursed by the federal government, and is it going to be reimbursed at the normal 75%? Sometimes, like in Superstorm Sandy, the federal government in that storm agreed to reimburse municipalities at 100% reimbursement rate because of the magnitude of the storm. So again, there's uncertainty all around on these type of things.
And I think that uncertainty rolls into this 2021 budget because we don't know what our tax revenues are truly going to look like. So there's a lot for us to take.
A lot
into
of
consideration.
uncertainty.
Yep. But we just have to keep holding the line and keep it orderly.
Yep.
Okay, so moving on to budget, to agenda
Wait, I'm
item
sorry,
number
Barbara, just can I ask one question?
Yeah.
It's related to timing. And it's that I know that the state has allowed municipalities some extra time in terms of finalizing their budgets for next year. Tom, what is our timeline now to have a budget approved?
Well, it's going to depend on whether the city takes advantage of the governor's extended the timelines by 30 days. But it's a local option. It's my understanding that at the council meeting, I haven't looked at their agenda, but I was told that the council was going to take that up as an action item, and I'm assuming they will approve it, but I haven't actually had a discussion with anyone on the city side to know whether or not that's what's expected. But I'm told that it's going to be on their agenda, and they'll take it up, and if they do approve it, that would push the city's budget approval from the first Monday in May to the first Monday in June. So what that means is then we would not actually have our final budget from the Board of Estimate until the first Monday in June. And our budget deadline normally says normally the city would have a final budget the first Monday in May, and then we would have until really the end of June before the fiscal year starts to reconcile to that final number. So in this case, the assumption is we would have until the end of July to reconcile the budget. But it does then beg the question, well, what happens in that first month of the fiscal year? Once you cross fiscal years, then the question becomes, well, what are you supposed to do for the month of July? And normally the way this works in, governments, state governments sometimes don't get their budget done before the fiscal year starts. Usually what you do is you indicate that the prior year's budget is carried forward until a successor budget is put in place. So, I'm not a lawyer. I haven't asked a legal opinion, but my assumption is that we would probably operate on something like that, where we would say we're going to use the prior year budget until if our board says we can't, get our budget done by June 30th. Now it may be that if the city gives us a budget by the first Monday in June, it may be that the board is ready to go and finalize the budget before June 30th at your June business meeting. My preference as the finance person would be to frankly do that, because it's kind of difficult to start a fiscal year without a budget. But I know the superintendent has talked about extending the budget deadline into July, and if that's what happens and the board does that, then we'll have to figure out what the implication is. I think the implication is that the prior year budget carries forward. So what that would mean from a practical standpoint is that the people who were already in the budget, in the current year budget, would not, get laid off on July 1st, but that if there was a new position that was being anticipated that was going to be funded in the new year budget, but the new year budget was not legally adopted, then we wouldn't be able to hire that new position until after the budget was adopted. And or if there was a new program that was being funded in the new budget that was not funded in the old year budget, same thing. You wouldn't be able to start it until after the budget is adopted. Now, since school doesn't start until the end of August, presumably if we had a budget that didn't get adopted until July 31st, it shouldn't mean that much disruption, but nevertheless, it is a bit of a disruption.
Okay, that's
I think-
very helpful. Thank you.
And thank you, Colin. That's a really good question. And I also think that because we have this transition to a new superintendent, some of the timing of that baton handoff could help us decide exactly how we want to time it, because we obviously want both superintendents weighing in, but ultimately the new superintendent's going to have to own this next year. So. Okay, moving on, if everybody's good. You good? So we're moving on to to review and discuss implementation of district business continuity plans relative to COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay, I did just want to take a few moments to let you know sort of what we're doing and where we are from a business continuity standpoint. Obviously, a lot has happened since our last Finance Committee meeting. We are all essentially working remotely. We do have a handful of district employees who are still reporting to a work location, but most of us are working from home at this point in order to enforce social distancing and to try to break the back of the pandemic, if you will. So we do have a few facilities people. At this point, the custodians are not coming into the buildings, but we do have Bill Hodel is still coming into City Hall, and we have some other facilities employees, George Speck, and I think there's about 5 or 6 facilities folks who are coming in to help coordinate activities. We do have some food service employees who are continuing to work because we are delivering meals to 10 sites, both breakfasts and lunches, as well as weekend meals. And so there are some facilities employees who are coming in. We have used the mailroom to help mail learning packets, although more recently we had been producing the learning packets in-house. We actually have a contracted print shop and a contracted mailroom, so they aren't district employees, but they are contracted to the district and are in our building. So we were using them for the learning packets, and we decided that it would be better to contract out the preparation of the learning packets. This is for the kindergarten or pre-K through grade 3, I believe it is, and decided to contract that out to avoid having to bring in our employees to be involved in this collating and stuffing of envelopes and so on. It was just becoming rather burdensome, and we were just fearful that it could potentially put employees in a place that we didn't want to put them. So we contracted that out. And that's about it in terms of the employees that are coming in. I believe some of the health nurses may be assisting the health department in things like contact tracing and other activities, and I'm not sure whether they're doing that remotely or doing that from the city health department. So other aspects of the business continuity plan, I'll talk a little bit further, but there is an executive order that the governor has issued, Executive Order 7R, and that executive order provides that school districts are to continue to keep their employees on payroll, which we have been doing. So our employees are fortunately paid via direct deposit, and so we are able to run payroll remotely and don't need to come into City Hall to do that. We are paying people based on their scheduled hours, and so if some people may be working slightly less or somewhat less than their scheduled hours, but we are paying them based on their scheduled hours. We have dispensed with using the timekeeping system at this point in terms of recording, punching in and punching out. If somebody is sick or somebody is, I don't know who's going to take a vacation in the current environment, but if somebody wants to take a vacation and has an approved vacation, then that would be recorded, the use of that vacation time, or if somebody uses personal time that they have accrued, then that is being recorded. The district has also made changes in terms of our accounts payable process, and we have implemented abbreviated, simplified procedures so that we can get our vendors paid. So we have, at this point, discontinued using requisitions and purchase orders.
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry, I lost you. There was some other noise.
Yeah, we've discontinued using requisitions and purchase orders, except in instances where the vendor may require, if the vendor requires a purchase order, we can produce a purchase order for them. But because the number of employees who have access to Munis, which is our financial system, everyone in the finance department has access to Munis from home. But that is not true for our secretaries out at all the schools. The secretaries at the schools, they have access to most of the district systems, but the financial system is actually a city system. And so you need a VPN connection and you need a laptop in order to access the financial system. So we've done away with requisitioning unless the vendor requires a purchase order, in which case we can do it centrally. My staff can generate the purchase order in that instance. But otherwise, we're just basically taking invoices and paying invoices on what's known as a payment voucher. We've set up an electronic payment voucher form that the secretaries and all of our principals and all of our department heads and their secretaries have access to. They can complete that payment voucher online and receive a electronic invoice from the vendor, and then we can process that through Munis to get the vendor paid. And so we are paying vendors, and so we do have a process in place to keep up with our bills. Particularly, obviously, at this point, we're focusing on making sure that we're paying our high priority vendors that we need to provide ongoing services. So things like the printing vendor who's doing the learning packets, for instance. We were sending him a ACH payment earlier this week to get him paid for the learning packets that he's doing now, and so forth. So.
Do you have any kind of preliminary number on the cost of the meals and whether we are receiving correct reimbursement for everything that we're giving out, or whether we're going to take a hit there?
Well, the issue is I do think we're going to take a hit there, but we do have accurate records, according to our food service team, of all the meals that we are delivering are being accurately claimed, and we will get reimbursement for those meals that we deliver. What we're operating under, the state has set up a emergency food program, which is essentially piggybacked on the same type of program that we use for our summer meals that we have been doing for many years. And so they are going to reimburse us on the meals. The issue why I'm saying that we are expecting to take a hit here is that we are at this point, delivering far fewer meals than we would if school were open. Particularly, we were delivering astronomical numbers when we were delivering on the buses, to the bus stops, but we had to move away from that delivery model, I guess a couple weeks ago now. And when we moved away from that delivery model, our total number of meals that we're delivering has gone down substantially. Now,
Can you give us a figure? I know
I-
we were at 20,000, and then where are we now?
Yeah, we were at 20,000, and I think I'd seen a email from Kevin on this. I'm not sure where it is. I think it was about 3,200 meals that we delivered today, I believe. So if we assume, on a
So 32,
basis,
3,200, is that 1,600 people picking up 2 meals a day? Or
yeah,
is that in a whole week? Okay.
that's breakfast and lunch, right?
And our free and reduced is about half, so that's like 6,000 usually?
Probably, yeah.
Okay. So are you thinking we're going to have a deficit in our food budget coming in at the end of this year because we're not able to get reimbursement from the federal government? That's what you're saying.
Yes, in fact, I believe that food service may very well be the single largest area where this crisis has thrown us into a unplanned or unexpected shortfall. I think that may very well be $1 million or perhaps even more.
And ironically, not because we were trying to deliver to as many people as possible, but it was when we pulled it back from.
Well, it's two things. It's the governor's executive order has essentially dictated that we are required to keep paying our existing staff. And so when we run the summer program, that program breaks even or actually operates at a with a slight additional funds that then get plowed back into the program. So if we were operating the program with just the staff needed to operate the current 10 sites, we only need a handful of people to do that. I think it's 20 people. We've got 2 people at each site, plus the security guards. And the food at this point is now all being delivered coming from an outside vendor. So we're not producing the food in-house at this point. But we're required to keep all the staff on under the executive order. So we really have this mismatch between our cost structure and the revenue that we're going to receive based on the number of meals that we provide. So the state is going to reimburse us roughly, it's about $3 a meal. It's less for breakfast and a little more for lunch. But they're going to reimburse us for those meals based on the number of meals that we deliver. But we have a requirement under the executive order to keep all the staff on. Now, the state's position on it is that, at least statewide, a significant portion of the education budgets are paid for by the state of Connecticut. They want to encourage, and I think some of this was even in the Federal CARES Act, in terms of requiring school districts to keep on their staff to the maximum extent practical. And some of it is about just trying to keep people employed and keep paychecks coming so that they don't end up in a place where they can't afford basic necessities and so forth. So I understand the rationale behind the policy, but it does put us in a position where there's this mismatch between the revenues that we're anticipating now and the expenses that we're incurring now. So
Tom, can you maybe send us a weekly report to this committee about just the basic numbers of the meals that we've put out?
Yeah,
every week?
yeah, I get those, and Frank gets those from the food service director. So he has been sharing that information, and certainly, we're if we could look at bringing back the old model, we would, but at least at the present time, it doesn't seem to be feasible to do that. So,
Yeah, I'm wondering if in another week or so, when some people maybe come out of quarantine, if we could strategically place one or two more distribution sites so that we're hitting more of our population.
yeah, I mean, certainly we want to focus the meals in the areas where the need is the greatest, and where the people are, relying on those meals to, make sure their children have adequate nutrition.
Mhm.
And, I think that is the reason, why we picked the sites we picked, but we can certainly look to see if, Frank can look to see if there's any changes that ought to be made there.
If workers come out of quarantine and are deemed safe to work, if we have the people available to do it. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So we're moving on did anyone have any questions? No, okay. Moving on to the discussion of preliminary budgetary and financial impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the Norwalk Public Schools.
Okay.
Do you feel like we already did that, or?
Well, I have, let me just share one, I can find it here. No, it's over. How come okay.
I didn't read that they call him His Excellency. That's fun.
Oh, yeah. Right. So, yeah, this was the executive order here that I'm sharing here. So just to, you can see what the executive order provides is good. The first item, which is related to continued funding for boards of education. So we are going to continue to receive, and the city will continue to receive its education cost sharing grant, payments for special education excess cost and choice programming, and municipalities shall continue to provide funding to local boards of education as set forth in the approved annual budgets.
Sorry, I lost connection for a little while, and I shouted to my husband to try to see if anything had happened, but I just came back, so I missed that last part, and I'm going to mute myself right now.
Okay.
It'll be on the recording, Elizabeth.
Right, it will be on the recording, so you'll be able to get back to it tomorrow anyway. So then item 2, you can see here is where it provides for the continuation of payment of public school staff, which we were just talking about, to avoid laying employees off. So we have not laid anyone off as a result of this crisis. You'll see here that it does also refer to teachers, paraprofessionals, other support staff, cafeteria staff, clerical staff, and custodial workers to the greatest extent practical. The point I was just making, for everyone on that list of employees, there are budget funds that are available for the teachers and paraprofessionals and custodians and so forth. It's the cafeteria staff that we have the biggest issue with because of the fact that they're not in our local budget. They're in a separate budget that is funded from the revenues from the school lunch program. And so if the revenues go down by, 75% for the last 3 months of the year, but our expenses don't go down by 75% for the last 3 months of the year, then that's where the problem arises. And then the last area is item 3, where it does also provide the preservation of student transportation services and special education providers. Does provide that the district is to renegotiate those contracts with the goals of those providers not having to lay off their employees in anticipation that they would be needed when school resumes. But we are uh, expected to renegotiate those contracts such that we're only being charged for the actual and reasonable cost of sustaining wage and health insurance payments for active employees. So it doesn't, so for instance, for transportation, we're going back and talking with those providers about getting credits for, things like gasoline that isn't, used and so forth on those contracts.
Do you think there'll be an insurance rebate in the same way that they're seeing for auto insurance?
That I don't know the answer to that. I think that's a reasonable request, but that's one that we haven't gotten an answer on yet. So, and so those are the items that are in the executive order. These are what I'm putting up on the screen now are just some of the areas that we're looking at and we're trying to get our arms around. So the areas on the top are areas where we see that there will be hopefully or likely some cost savings. So substitutes, monitors for cafeteria, actually cafeteria monitors we're continuing to pay. This list was put together earlier. Outside tutors, potentially spring sports, coach stipends for spring sports. We expect there might be some savings for some extra work and extra duty and after school type functions that typically might have been paid that if they're not occurring wouldn't be paid. Overtime expenses for employees, security overtime and custodial overtime, the Social Security and Medicare that's related to any savings in any of those areas. In transportation, again, you saw the governor's executive order, so most of our transportation contracts we are going to have to continue to pay, but there should be some savings in transportation. Athletic transportation and other specialized transportation services. There should be some savings in those things, obviously field trips and so forth, things like that. Utilities, because the buildings are closed, we do expect there should be some reduction in the electricity expenses and the very tail end of the heating season. So there'll be some modest savings in utilities. There may be some savings in building maintenance projects that we're unable to undertake, but on the other hand, there may be, and there are additional costs in the building maintenance area because of the close downs. So we'll have to kind of net the two against each other. Trash removal expenses, we've discontinued regular trash removal at the schools, so there's some savings there. We're expecting some savings in employee mileage reimbursement and travel expenses. Obviously, we don't expect any travel expenses during this current period, which there may be some travel related to professional development and conferences and some professional development. This is one of the areas that we need to get some further guidance from Brenda Myers on, is whether or not professional development activities that were anticipated to take place this spring, whether or not those are going to continue or whether they'll be deferred, and if so, there could be some savings there. And then there may be some savings in some supply areas that, paper, and although we've actually used a lot of paper in generating these learning packets, but there may be some other school supplies or some other things that potentially there could be some savings.
With the special education situation as it is, do you think there may be some savings in our legal fund as well?
I don't know. I can't answer that. I think there's going to be, if there's savings there, I think it's going to be short term.
Because in the fall we'll have people needing.
Right. I think there's going to be, issues, and obviously our special ed department and Yvette Gorovich are monitoring this closely, and but it's possible that we may have some services that we hadn't anticipated that need to be provided, and whether or not there's any disputes over those issues, I can't say. So I think if there are savings in the legal area, it would probably be short-term savings, not necessarily long-term savings. So some of the areas where we're looking at increased expenditures. Now, again, the first item on here, this list was put together before we had we started putting the list together before we had the latest executive order. So at this point, we're not really expecting an increase in unemployment. But we have online meeting hosting. There was some talk about working with the city to have an outside entity do our meeting hosting for us. I understand from Ralph that the city was not able to find someone, so I think Ralph is going to be doing it himself for the board meetings. But student technology, we have spent a great deal of money on student technology, and we did notify the mayor, and the mayor has concurred that there were some extraordinary expenses that we have that he has indicated that we will be, looking to the city and or the federal government, the state government to help with those. So one of them was in student technology. We have ordered or have received, I think, about $415,000 worth of Chromebooks that have been distributed. So that was an unanticipated expense. Legal expenses is another area that, again, there may be some additional expenses just trying to understand, how to proceed in this really extraordinary circumstance. The food service area I've already talked about. I think that may turn out to be one of the largest areas of unanticipated expense for us. Building cleaning and sanitizing. We have entered into contract with 4 outside vendors to sanitize our buildings. That contract is being executed on a time and materials basis, but we believe the cost of that may be in the range of about $600,000. So that's a very significant expense. Distance learning expenses are still being compiled, but certainly there are expenses there. Supplies, noted here, temporary tents. We have erected 10 temporary tents where we're distributing meals from. I think the cost of that is about $20,000. Lost facility rental income is another area that we are, trying to nail down what that is going to cost. We're expecting some cleaning supply expenses may go up. We've already started to process some tuition refunds for preschool. We've decided that it was not reasonable for us to continue to charge parents for preschools that aren't open. And there are a handful of cases where we've needed to provide cell phones, as I understand it. The IT department has overtime expenses and technology expenses. Mailing, postage, and printing for the learning packets, I think, is running at something like $15,000 to $20,000 a week, and so that's a significant unplanned expense.
Is that something that might be included in reimbursement from the state or federal?
I think that's one of the ones that we would probably try to claim, yes. Medicaid reimbursement, we expect we're going to have less Medicaid reimbursement. Workers' comp claims, we're really not sure of, but we have to be obviously concerned about COVID-19 and potential workers' comp exposure, and any other insurance claims as well that we don't know of at this point, but it would certainly be a possibility.
Okay. I think this list was not sent to the committee. Could that be sent out, please? And could you annotate the items that you think we could try and qualify for reimbursement, just so that we have it in our minds?
Sure. Sure,
Great.
we can
Thank
do
you.
that. Yeah, and so we're still trying to sort of fill these numbers in here. We will try to come back to you. The objective is to try to come back to you at your next meeting with some estimates here. But it's a pretty big undertaking to try to figure this out. So
Thank you so much for doing it.
okay, very good. So
Wouldn't want to be in anybody else's hands right now. You're the
okay.
guy.
Well, thank you. Okay, so I think, was that everything we had on the agenda?
No, we have to vote on the transfers. So item number 6, fiscal year 2019-2020 transfers. And essentially you're taking from the substitutes and certified hourly and transferring over for the instructional supplies.
Correct, yes. So that's actually related to the, related to the school closure or related to the distance learning, really. So,
Right.
and that was $111,000. I think you do have the backup on that.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone from the committee have any questions? No? Okay, so let's, can I have a motion to approve these transfers?
I'll make that motion.
Okay, Colin moved, Diana seconded. All in favor of approving these budget transfers?
Aye.
Aye.
Sherelle? Sherelle, are you there?
I'm sorry, I was cooking and I muted everyone.
That's
Aye.
okay. Your aye. Okay, so we're unanimous to approve those budget transfers. Thank you for taking care of that work. Item number 7 is fiscal year 2019-20 financial report for March of 2020, which did not print out very nicely on my printer, I will say. But Tom, why don't you walk us through that? And I think to have it on the screen for the public would be great.
Sure, let me share my screen again. Hold on. And I'll shrink it down a little bit. I don't know if I make it too much smaller, we may not be able to read it.
Yeah.
Let's see.
I'm getting old, Tom. Stop. You're killing me.
Right. Whoops,
There you go.
not 185. Let me
No.
try.
150.
Let me. Okay. Can you read that?
Yeah, I have it in front of me too, but as long as the public can read it. Yep.
Okay. So at this point, we are 75% of the way through the fiscal year and 70% through the school year, and we spent 65.6% of our budget at this point. We are running on target on salaries, and so we don't expect to run over budget on salaries or on benefits, which are running at 65% and 69% respectively. Professional and technical services, which is primarily special education, is the biggest single item in there, is running a bit low actually at 54%. Some of that may be a timing issue at this point because of the abrupt shutdown, if you will, of operations. I believe it's likely that we may be behind in processing some of those bills. But based on our earlier iteration of earlier reviews of our budget, we believe that we're in very good shape on those accounts. Mm-hmm. The property services are running a bit high at about 69% of budget expended, but that is, I believe, incorporates some one-time expenses and some prepayment of some items. To try to bring up the, I think here's the detail. Let's see. So here is the detail. If I go to the 400 series of accounts, this is the detail of the property services accounts. So this includes the outsourced custodial services. We are engaged with the outsourced custodial vendor. We were using them for the first several weeks of the shutdown. but we now are talking with them. They are not subject to the same provisions of the governor's executive order. So they are proposing some creative solutions to try to keep their employees on payroll, but we have not reached any agreement with them. So that is an area that we're continuing to work with the vendor on, but there may be some budget savings in outsourced custodial services for a period of time. We will, need all of our crews, including the outsourced custodians, back in at some point to do the work that would normally be done in the summer, and when that's going to occur, and whether or not that needs to occur at a different time because of potential summer learning programs. There's a lot of balls up in the air currently, so there's a lot of unknowns, but so we're trying to kind of work through that with our curriculum department and with our contractors. The other accounts in here, various maintenance items, I think we will start to see that some of those expenses will come down as these buildings are shut down. I'm expecting there's going to be a delay in spending some of these accounts in the month of, certainly in the month of April, as the buildings are shut. In the 500 series of account, the other services, the primary item here is student transportation. We do prepay the transportation bills by and large because we get a prepayment discount. So we will be negotiating with those vendors for a credit for the expenses that are not related to the governor's executive order. So in other words, we'll be paying them to maintain their staff on payroll, but not some of their other expenses that may be variable and may have declined or may be temporarily eliminated while they're not providing transportation. Supplies and materials, I think the total, we're at about 60% of the budget expended, so we're pretty much right on budget here. I do think we are going to have maintenance supplies and some other things that may increase as we look to reopen the buildings. So some of it's going to depend on when we think we get back into the buildings, which is also an unknown. But that is certainly an area that we expect. There may be some reductions, but then there may be some increases, if we're opening the buildings in later before June 30th in order to get those buildings ready for a reopening. Our equipment accounts are at this point, again, also 60% expended. So we're, quite close to being pretty much on budget. And, I think I don't see big changes in these areas between now and the end of the year. And finally, our 800 object codes are 73%, so we're pretty much right on budget there. I should say, you'll notice there isn't much recorded here yet, but we have created a separate object code 912, which you see at the very bottom of this, which is COVID-19 related expenses. There's only 150,000 that's recorded here. I think there's bills that probably haven't hit yet, but these are items there that we want to record separately where we think there may be a state or federal reimbursement on, so that we can easily pull those invoices to compile the paperwork that's going to be necessary to get reimbursement. So I think, I don't know if there's any questions on this report. Any issues that anyone wants to discuss on it?
No, I think it looks good. The only thing, Kristen, can you remind me, the long-term sub is higher, but that was because you recoded or something? Is that right?
A long-term subcategory, let's see.
It's at 217.
There's still, yep. So the original budget on long-term subs was 185,000. Adjusted budget was 127, and it looks like year-to-date spending is higher, but we're still doing reclassifications to get things into the correct budget, as well as the talent department, the talent office needs to submit a budget transfer to cover a piece of that, because some of the costs there were running a little bit high.
Okay.
We do expect that the daily subs, which are now in the 330 account and in the school budgets, that we do expect there will be savings in those accounts because, you know, we're not really employing daily subs through this distance learning process.
Correct. So
Right.
those two we can net together as part, or they could just provide a transfer. I think there were higher number of FMLAs than originally budgeted.
Right.
Are you there? Sorry, my computer keeps doing this. That doesn't affect our contract with the sub, the new contract for subs, does it?
I don't think there's any minimums in there. So, you know, I think it's just kind of put on hold, essentially. We just got it started for literally a couple of weeks and then we're shut down. So.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. Are there any questions from the committee? We're at the end of our agenda.
No, this has been very helpful. Thanks, Tom, and thanks to your Kristen and to crew.
Okay, well, thank you. And if there's anything, any information that people want, certainly reach out to us via email or, you know, however is most convenient, and we're happy to help.
Great. Thank you so much, Tom and Kristen, everybody, Sandra, for sticking with us. Tom, are you in regular contact with Henry Dashowitz?
I've spoken with him a few times, and that actually did raise a point I should mention, is that Henry has put in place, we had discussions, as I'd indicated, the superintendent had discussions with the mayor about the cost of the building cleaning service, as well as the purchase of the Chromebooks. And so Henry has put in place, both for city departments, and he's asked us to also do it on any extraordinary expenses that we don't think can be covered within our regular operating budget. He's asked us to provide him with a form, fill out a form that documents what the expense is. And so we are doing that. And so I've had a couple of discussions with Henry about that issue. And I know that Frank Costanzo is also attending regular briefings, I believe, of the emergency management team. I don't know if Sandra is familiar with exactly, you know, how often those occur, but I believe Frank is representing the school district on the city's emergency management.
I believe they're weekly.
Okay, so he's in on weekly meetings that would include, you know, the mayor and the usually in these kinds of situations, you've got the city's senior leadership team, the police chief and fire chief and public works director and emergency management director, health director, obviously, in this situation, and other partners. So.
Okay, great. If you could just keep the committee abreast if there's anything coming from the city side that we may not be aware of yet.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, thank you so much, everybody, for your time this evening. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Sherelle, and seconded by Colin. All in favor? Aye.
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 Okay, great.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so
Thank
much for your
you.
time, and keep us posted. Thanks so much.
Okay,